Welcome to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast, where we explore all things gardening, from urban green spaces to thriving home landscapes. I'm your host, Kristin Hildabrand, and today we're diving into a topic that every gardener and homeowner should know: how to prune landscape trees correctly. This is not just a skill, but a responsibility that comes with maintaining a healthy and beautiful yard. We'll delve into the why, when, and how of tree pruning with our guest, Bowling Green City Arborist Jared Weaver. His wealth of knowledge will cover everything from timing your cuts to choosing the right tools. Plus, we'll share some critical tips for avoiding common mistakes that could harm your trees. So, grab your pruners and let's get pruning.
Welcome to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast. This gardening show will equip and inspire avid gardeners with tips and tricks to help them navigate the gardening world. The show will also highlight specific growing requirements for seasonal plants, so the sun will shine brighter over their Kentucky garden. And now, here's that ray of sunshine, garden enthusiast and horticulture extension agent, Kristin Hildabrand, with the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service.
Welcome back to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast, and joining with us today is Jared Weaver. He is the City Arborist for Bowling Green. How are you, Jared?
I'm good. How are you today, Kristin?
I am doing good, and I am so glad that you were able to come on the podcast with us today because we are in a very special week here in Bowling Green. We're celebrating Tree Week 2024. And I know that you've had a lot of responsibilities with Tree Week. And so we're going to get into a little bit here about tree pruning. But just to get the conversation going, can you tell us specifically, maybe explain more about your role as the city arborist and what your day-to-day responsibilities look like?
Sure, absolutely. So I work within the Parks Department of the City of Bowling Green. My official job title is the City Parks Arborist / Forester. As a broad picture, that means I take care of all the trees in our city parks, which involves everything from the planning phase, deciding, which trees go where, when to prune trees, all that big picture stuff, down to the little details of actually physically planting the trees, monitoring for pests and insects and fungal diseases, that sort of thing, pruning and working with contractors, and actually removing trees when they become at the end of their life cycle.
Yes, so it seems like there's a lot involved with being our city arborist, and you do such a good job. And I know I've been able to work with you on the tree board from time to time, and you do a great job with the Arbor Day celebration. And that usually is held in the month of April. Is that correct?
Yes, it's in the month of April every year. I think it might be the third Saturday this year. I don't remember the exact date. But thank you for the compliments. I really enjoy taking care of trees. I've been doing it with the city for a little over 19 years now. So it's a great joy to me to be out there among the trees on a daily basis and taking care of them and helping improve our urban forest for the residents of Bowling Green.
Yes, I know that you're a big tree lover, if I could call it that. And, to be a certified arborist, there's a lot of certifications that you've had to do. And I think that you also had to take a big test, and you also keep your certifications, and that does allow you to have that tree knowledge. Is that something that you're glad that you've done?
Absolutely. To take the ISA, that's the International Society of Arboriculture, to be a certified arborist and take that test, it requires a knowledge of the biology of a tree, everything from the soils through photosynthesis, how everything works in the tree. And to understand all of those processes that happen within that tree really gives you a better knowledge base to help take care of that tree. So I do a lot more than just pruning a tree or digging a hole and planting it in the ground. And understanding the biology of that tree really helps me understand how that tree will react to pruning at different times of the year, why it's a better time of the year to plant a tree at a certain time than another time. So that basis is really important. And there's other things as well in the ISA exam, like basic climbing techniques, how to do the practical work as well as the theory of that. So it covers everything. It's really pretty comprehensive certification.
Yes, I would say it's a deep dive into tree care. And like you said, knowing more about the tree processes. And I know that we get a lot of questions here at the Extension office about this particular topic that I have you on the podcast about today. And it's specifically about pruning. And I know a lot of times people think that you can just go get your pruning shears and go to town. But it's really important to know more about the tree and the best time of year for the tree pruning. So, Jared, just to kind of ask you, when is the best time of year for tree pruning? And does that really vary for different tree species?
The best time of the year for tree pruning, as a big picture, is when the tree is under the least amount of stress. So when most trees are under the least amount of stress is when they're dormant in the wintertime. So for deciduous trees, when they've dropped all of their leaves off, they're kind of gone to sleep for the winter. They're not biologically as active as they are in the summertime. Same thing with evergreens. They're still doing a little bit in the winter, not nearly as much as they would in the summer, though. So they're kind of in a dormant stage. So pruning in that dormant season is the optimum time. We do prune throughout the year, depending on our scheduling and the needs. We can't do everything at the best time possible, unfortunately. We just don't have that much time. So in the summer, if you do need to prune a tree, we try to limit it to pruning broken branches, for storm damage or that sort of thing. But if you do have to prune at other times of the year, try to do it when the tree is not under stress from extreme heat or extreme drought stress, that sort of thing. We try to avoid those times. We also try to avoid right when the buds are swelling and emerging, when the leaves are emerging in the spring. That's a very transformative time for the tree in the spring. Also, right in the fall when the leaves are dropping, that's a lot of biological activity happening in the tree when they're reallocating resources to prepare for that winter dormancy. So try to avoid those times when the tree is undergoing major changes or it's under a lot of stress. But the dormant season is the best time, generally speaking, for most tree work.
What about for evergreen type of landscape trees? Is that the same for the dormancy?
Yes, they'll still be semi-dormant in the winter. They'll still have their needles or leaves on them, even if the evergreen trees, but they'll still be having a lot less biological activity happening in that winter season. And there's a lot less pests active in the winter also. So it's the optimum time after the leaves fall off of the deciduous trees, but before the buds start to swell in the spring.
So you've been able to tell us, the best time of year for both deciduous and evergreen trees. Can you next walk us through the basic steps of proper tree pruning?
Sure. So when we go out to prune a tree in the parks, I like to teach my employees that we call pruning by prescription. So we don't just arbitrarily say, these trees all have to be pruned in the park. We want to know and understand exactly why we're pruning that tree. That'll help us do a better job of it. So the first thing we do with any tree we're pruning is we do a crown cleaning. And that means we're going to prune out anything that's dead, broken, or has generally poor structure. If the branches are crossing and rubbing on each other, which can create an injury to the tree, we want to remove the potential problems for the tree. Anything that's dead or broken has to come out for safety reasons. But then if you've got rubbing branches, if you have a branch with a fungal infection, we want to remove those for the health of the tree to make it a more long-term process for the tree. After that, we want to start looking at what that tree is doing in our landscape. What function is it performing, and is it meeting that function? So if we have a tree that we planted as a screen in between two separate uses, we want to make sure we keep that canopy of that tree as thick and full as possible to create that screen. Conversely, if a tree is near a sidewalk or a street, or for homeowners, if it's near your front walkway or close to your house, you may need to prune that tree for clearance. You may need to limit up above the sidewalk to a certain height, or prune it so it's not going to grow into your front room window or that sort of thing. So consider what the function is of that tree and prune with that in mind. And we also work with the electrical utility companies, and we talk about something called directional pruning. And they're pruning to make trees grow away from the power lines. Any branch that's growing towards the power lines, they want to prune it so it grows the opposite direction. And in order to accomplish that, you have to look at the angle of the branches, how that species of tree tends to naturally grow, what its habit is. And homeowners can apply that as well. If they've got a tree planted close to their home, they might want to do some directional pruning so it grows away from their home, away from their house, away from the gutters, that sort of thing, to make it grow the right direction. You can still plant a tree relatively close to other things, but prune it while it's young with that future growth in mind.
Exactly. And I appreciate you kind of telling us the basic steps of proper tree pruning. And sometimes you just have to like you said, I know directional is one of the things, and also, for the size, for the space, but just looking at the shape of the tree can kind of give you an indication on how to prune it, because I know there's a lot of different shapes that are available for a lot of different trees too.
Absolutely. Yeah, you've got a crabapple tree, you would prune a lot differently than you would an oak tree because of their mature size. You want to consider that mature size. And a lot of this goes back, especially if you're a homeowner, to planting the right tree in the right place initially. I always like to get that in there because, you minimize your pruning needs by planting the right tree in the right place at the very start of that tree's life. So right tree in the right place, you'll have to do a lot less pruning overall. We often do have to do some corrective pruning when we get a tree from the nursery. If the listeners ever have a chance to go out and look at trees in nature and observe them from the time they're a seedling through their growth as a sapling into a mature tree, trees in nature are usually a lot more sparsely branched than the trees we find in a nursery. Nursery grown trees, they tend to prune them so they look very full when they're young. But a naturally grown tree is going to be a lot thinner, a lot more sparsely branched. And we want to try to mimic nature while we're doing our pruning to get that long-term structure. We want to look 15, 20, 30 years down the road and consider how that tree is supposed to look naturally according to its natural branch habit and its natural growth.
Absolutely. And it's a lot of fun, especially for this particular month that we're in, the month of October, to be able to get in and around the area. I know, Lost River Cave is a good spot. I know there's several parks that you all have worked on to be able to see some of these mature trees because, like you said, right spot, right tree for that right location does make a huge difference. Now, I do have a question, and this kind of relates back to improper pruning techniques, but how can those improper techniques affect the health and lifespan of a tree if you were to maybe, like you said, not consider the natural habitat of the tree?
Good question. The worst pruning that we see, we usually call it topping, where somebody comes in and they arbitrarily cut that tree. They just say, I want that tree to be 25 feet tall, and they cut off every branch. That leads to a lot of problems with the tree if you don't consider the natural growth patterns of that tree. That leaves large wounds where decay can come back into that tree. When you do something that severe, you're removing all of those buds and foliage that tree has put all of its resources into growing. Leaves are what provide food to the tree. They gather the energy from the sunlight and they photosynthesize and create the food for the tree. So without those leaves and buds that it's stored all that energy in, you're really starving that tree, and it causes it to use all of its stored energy and to create new growth. When it uses all of its stored energy, it doesn't have that energy to fend off insect and disease attacks or compartmentalize wounds. So it's really hard for that tree to recover if you've basically taken all of its capability to make food away from it.
Yes, and I know that we do try to educate here at the extension office about, we don't want you to top the tree, but we want you to prune it as natural as possible. And you kind of hit on those basic steps for proper tree pruning. But yeah, those topping can really, like you said, make it more pest attractant for diseases and insects. Now, whenever we go about pruning our trees, what tools do you carry, or what do you recommend for homeowners who do want to prune their trees?
For your average homeowner, I wouldn't recommend climbing up in the tree and doing that sort of work. It can become very dangerous if you get up into the tree with a chainsaw. Best left to the professionals. There's a good place to find a certified arborist called treesaregood.com. That's all spelled out words, treesaregood.com. And you can search for an arborist to do those more advanced techniques. But for your average homeowner, a pair of good hand pruners and a good handsaw will accomplish a lot of your pruning needs. Everything that you can reach from standing on the ground, you can accomplish with a good pair of pruners and a good handsaw. If you want to reach a little bit higher, get a stick pruner, something that's got a lopper on the end where you can reach a little higher into the canopy of the tree. I would avoid the pole saw chainsaws for most homeowners, because that can become dangerous as well. You can start to get a little tricky when you start pruning larger limbs. But if you've got a hand pruners or a pole pruner, you can accomplish a lot of work with that. The important things for that is to make sure you keep your pruners sharp, make sure they're well maintained so they function properly and they don't tear the bark on the tree.
Yes, I'm glad that you mentioned the trees are good website, because I know that is where we oftentimes will send, clients that come into the office that do need some professional services through a certified arborist. And sometimes they, if you don't feel comfortable getting in a tree and doing those type things, then it's always good to call the professionals, and they'd be certainly glad to help. Now, as far as, can you tell us kind of some safety precautions that individuals take when they're pruning trees to avoid injury? I know you kind of mentioned that about the chainsaw, but are there any others?
Absolutely. Here at the city, we have a list of safety rules that we have to follow, of course, and for good reason. We want everyone to be safe and go home just the same at the end of the day as the when they came to work that morning. So we wear safety glasses to protect our eyes from poking branches and sawdust. Particularly if you're pruning anything above your head height. If you're cutting with a saw, that sawdust can get in your eye, and that can cause a severe injury to your eyes. And everyone wants to see to enjoy these beautiful trees. A good pair of sturdy gloves. If you're doing anything above head height using pole pruners, hard hats are recommended. But good sturdy work boots are always nice to wear, something that's going to provide you a little ankle support so you don't twist your ankles. And of course, good work clothes. You want something that's going to resist some abrasions, a good pair of pants and a work shirt or a jacket, depending on the season. Eyeglasses are one of the most important because it's too easy to get poked in the eyes with a branch or to get sawdust in your eye. And that can be really, really irritating to your eyes and cause severe injuries.
Yes, and we do want people to feel safe and protected when they are doing some of these pruning techniques that we've talked about. Now, as far as the tree removal, what do you generally advise people if they're doing that on their own rather than using a certified arborist?
If you're getting into tree removal, you might be getting into chainsaw territory.
Mm-hmm.
And I would highly recommend you wearing the full protective gear if you're using a chainsaw. Chainsaw chaps, the full helmet with the face shield and all that, in addition to the gloves and the eyeglasses. So safety is of number one importance there. But there's a lot of information online, both good and bad, about how to use a chainsaw and remove a tree. There's whole classes we teach on this to get down into the details. But if you're not comfortable using a chainsaw, don't take the risk of felling a tree if you're not comfortable cutting up something that's already on the ground. If you've got storm damage, make sure you're paying attention to power lines, or even if it's not storm damage, if you're felling a tree, make sure you're paying very close attention to where the overhead power lines are. Make sure you look at the way that tree is leaning, if it's going to fall one way or another. Gravity is a very powerful force. If the tree's leaning, the tree's most likely to go that way already. But if you have the opportunity, take a chainsaw class and understand the reactive forces of that chain and kick back, and understand how to cut a proper notch in a tree to make it fall the right direction and have the best control over that tree so that you're minimizing the chances of anything going wrong.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate you sharing some of those safety precautions with us, because pruning, I know there's a lot of different equipment that you can be utilizing, and I think you covered that basis really well. I wanted to circle back and revisit something, and maybe you can use specific examples with this one too, Jared, if it comes to mind. But can you share any tips on identifying when, like, say, certain tree species do need pruning? Is there just like an obvious, sign that says, oh, this needs to be pruned?
A lot of it depends on the natural growth habits of that tree. Now, if it's a nursery grown tree when it's young, it's probably going to need some corrective pruning to help it live its best life and grow to be a large, mature tree that has good structure and good form. When it comes to flowering, if you've got a flowering tree, trees like crepe myrtles that flower in the summer, you can prune those in the fall, and they'll form their buds in the spring. But if you've got a spring flowering tree like cherry trees or dogwoods, you want to prune those for optimum flowering effect. You want to prune those after the flowers in the spring, because they're going to spend that summer growing new flower buds. And if you prune the dogwood or cherry in the winter, you're pruning off the flower buds for that coming spring. So you want to consider your tree health as well as flowering time for those. And sometimes it's a trade-off. If the tree is very healthy, you can prune it after they flower in the spring. If a tree might not be the healthiest, you might consider pruning that in the winter to take care of those issues. And you might have a few flowers that next spring, but the long-term tree health might be a bit more important than 1 year's flower growth.
Very much so. And I'm glad that you did mention that about the flowering trees, because a lot of times we do as homeowners come in contact with those that like that seasonal color. So it does make a difference when you're having some of those blooms for the season. Now, Jared, I know that we've covered, basic steps for pruning trees and then the best time of year. You've also covered pruning techniques that maybe are not the best, as well as tools and, some safety precautions. Is there anything else you want to mention that homeowners may need to know about pruning trees that we haven't covered so far?
Yeah, it's good we came back around to this. We've talked about some of the bigger picture things about overall structure of the tree and everything, but the mechanics of the individual pruning cut are very important also. If you get a chance, go out and spend time looking at mature trees, and there's terms we use called branch collar and branch bark ridge that you want to become familiar with. So when you prune a branch off of a tree, you want to mimic the way nature would naturally shed that branch. If a tree is getting large, the lower branches will get shaded out and they'll naturally die off. Look at that on mature trees and see exactly how nature sheds those branches. And that's what we try to want to recreate. We have a lot of good information on our city website about this. That's bgky.org/tree. Or you can look up tree compartmentalization, and that'll give you a lot of information about how trees grow, how the tree tissues overlap, and why you want to leave that branch collar on a tree when you prune it, why you want to make a good 3-step pruning cut to avoid tearing bark down the trunk of the tree. Make as small of a wound as possible, because every pruning cut is essentially a wound to that tree. And the better pruning cuts that you do, the smaller injury to that tree that you make, the easier that tree is going to have a time of compartmentalizing and sealing over that wound and minimizing the chance for fungal organisms to get in that tree and decay it.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that. That's a very important step that we have when we go about pruning, and we definitely don't want to damage the main trunk of the tree, and that's really good material to know. I know that we've covered a lot on the podcast today, but, say if somebody needs some visuals or they need more information, Jared, do you have a good spot to send them to get that information?
Sure. bgky.org/tree is a great website, as well as treesaregood.com. Or if you just Google natural target pruning, you should come up with a lot of information on there. The Arbor Day Foundation also has some good information on their website about the mechanics of pruning and how to do that. So there's a lot of good websites out there, but most of those good websites, they're all looking at the way a tree naturally sheds branches and trying to recreate that. So spend some time in nature, look at trees and the way they naturally grow, and that'll give you a good head start on how you should be pruning a tree.
Yes. Thank you, Jared, for all that information. And I know when we opened up the podcast that we talked about this is Tree Week, and where can people find all the different Tree Week activities that are going on just for, say, Bowling Green?
On our city website, the City Tree Board website, bgky.org/tree, we've got a list of activities there, as well as a link to the State Tree Week website. The Urban Forest Initiative, I believe, is who's doing that. They've got activities all around the state, in addition to Bowling Green, about all kinds of great ways you can get out, enjoy nature, and be among the trees and celebrate all the great benefits that trees provide us.
Yes. Well, Jared, thank you so much for being on the podcast with us today. I know that I'm definitely a lot better at knowing all the advice and, recommendations that you shared for tree pruning. And we invite people to check out some of that information in the show notes, and we'll get that posted up on the Warren County Agriculture blog. But Jared, thank you so much for all that you've talked to us about today. And we hope that you all have a great tree week, and we'll be talking to you again in the future.
Thank you. I love talking trees with you, Kristin.
Thank you. That's a wrap on this episode of the Sunshine Gardening Podcast. We hope you've learned valuable tips on correctly pruning trees in Kentucky's landscape. The key is to plan carefully, prune with care, and prioritize the health of your trees. Thank you again to our guest, Jared Weaver, for sharing his expertise. To see the show notes for episode 39, make sure to visit us over on the blog at warrencountyagriculture.com. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving us a review on your preferred podcast platform. Your reviews help us connect with more people and provide valuable feedback for improvement. We also encourage you to share your biggest gardening success or takeaway with us. Please let us know if you have any questions or topics you'd like to see covered in future episodes. Until next time, remember, a little pruning today means more vital, healthier trees tomorrow. We're here to support you on your gardening journey. So, happy gardening.
Thanks for listening to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast with Kristin Hildabrand. If you enjoyed today's content, make sure to hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts to catch future segments of the Sunshine Gardening Podcast. Gardeners, keep on digging and learning more about gardening so the sun shines brighter over your Kentucky garden. The Sunshine Gardening Podcasts with Kristin Hildabrand is a production of the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service.